So as we slip into 1814, let's see what we got. The Brits have, first of all, I've got the Treaty of Ghent on top, so I remember to shuffle it in, but I don't know, there may be something, I don't think there is in this game, that allows you to draw another card. Rottenburg ran up to Quebec. There were a lot of British reinforcements down up here, and, well, I don't have a way of moving them. He can't command them all, but he can take all but one down, and that seemed more efficient because Prevost was too far away, even though he's got Drummond there who would be helpful. Kind of misusing Drummond, using him as a secondary officer because his bonus doesn't come in place. On the other hand, Dearborn is trying to rally his troops, make his force of some value. You could say, well, why don't you use Harrison? Well, the problem with Harrison is he's getting spread pretty thin. He doesn't have a lot more he can gain, but if the Americans could take Albany back, this game becomes much, much closer. Right now it's an 18-point game. Now, Harrison, if he had more forces, could just keep marching and taking things, but I don't know if he has enough to take Kingston with any ease. And other than York, there are no other real values down here. Fort Dover down here. He's got troops spread out where they don't really need to be terribly, except because of his supply line. He has to maintain that that route going through. Because right now this is the only place any supplies are coming from for the Americans. That creates a big limitation, and it makes Fort George kind of more valuable. He might be able to march up to York. That might suffice. But the George-Niagara combination is very helpful right here. So here's a kind of interesting situation. A minor operations card I just played to move Rottenburg down. But it also allows, and I've been using them for this, to build a naval unit. It's worded as, additionally, one naval unit can be built or repaired at a friendly naval base, or one can move but not carry. This is kind of troublesome. I'm going to allow it, but the cost for a frigate is a 2-point card, and this is only a 1-point card. That wouldn't normally apply to an event, and that's why I'm not listing it as such. I'm going to allow myself to build a frigate with that. But it does feel a little weird to toss such a big ship into play with a weak card. There are other cases, though, where the points of the card, for example, the minor operations is only a 1-point card, but I can move a 2-point general with it. So, yeah, alright. I'll have to follow the card as written. But it does feel a little like you would never use this for the ops points unless it was tremendously important to increase a unit or build a supply depot or something of the sort. I think the Americans, and Dearborn in particular, delayed too long. They let their opportunity pass. Rottenburg managed to come down and cut things at Fort George. He cut him at Burlington, actually, cut the supply. Hit Harrison at Fort George. Harrison stood and fought. But the American supply line's cut again. We've lost that trade here. Harrison's cut over into the out-of-supply section. Dearborn's forces are now half. Harrison's were in the fight. He wasn't in that bad a shape with the fortification, etc., with the fact that Rottenburg's forces are humongous. It was a +2 to the British attack. But the Brits played this inspired leadership, drove it up to +4, took the important space. This cuts the Americans in 2 pieces and makes it very, very difficult. Now comes an interesting question. What happens if Rottenburg continues marching? Brock's not too far from Pittsburgh. Rottenburg could take these. I don't know if that's the answer. This is, right now the Brits have a pretty significant victory. Not quite to the decisive 20-point level, but if Rottenburg heads this way, they'll get that as well. And I think without putting the same risk. Right now they've got an army screening each of the American forces, with the exception of Brown. He's not really at issue here. But he doesn't have a whole lot, and there's a decent force here at Kingston to defend it. And I'm shifting down one of these units towards Prevost. It's going to be hard for the Americans, I think. They may just launch a preemptive strike into Albany. that'll solve their supply issue too, in a sense. And Prevost is not that powerful yet, but this unit is getting closer. That'll add to his strength. So maybe an out-of-supply attack makes sense. Well, the Americans play a minor operations card. And this row is kind of a question in my head, because they played it and built themselves a ship over here at Sackett's Harbor, one of them frigates. What right? Why can they build a ship, which presumably needs cannon, etc., without a supply line? And to some extent, I can understand the argument, well, the wood's there, the manpower is largely there. It's not like recouping troops where you have to ship more men in. Maybe, but it does feel a little funny. I looked for a rule requiring supply, I couldn't find one. So, yeah, the Americans can keep building and launching boats even though they don't have a supply line, and that kind of disturbs me a little bit. And then they used the other half for Dearborn to attack again. He was at -2 to begin with. The Brits threw an inspired leadership card out. Did a couple of step losses to him, drove him back. You know, it's kind of a... He can take his crapshoots to attack it, and that might even the score somewhat. You know, it draws it down to, say, 6 or whatever. But it's not a pleasing prospect, especially with him out of supply, and I think I may have forgotten to take that into account. Oops. Well, he took the worst result possible. Attacker retreats and takes 2 step losses. So, we'll leave it sitting there. But yeah, the Brits probably wouldn't have had to play that card. Yeah, it's not a pleasing situation for the Americans at this point. Okay, well, still going badly. Rottenberg crosses over to Niagara. He actually slips through Lewiston and attacks. Harrison gets forced back, can go back to Lewiston. In fact, that's the only place he could really retreat to. Continuing to build ships using minor operations cards, even though out of supply. Rensselaer makes an attack, basically just trying to open up some way. This is beginning to look like the door is going to close on the Niagara frontier. So, if that happens, then taking Erie wouldn't help. Well, he wasn't able to do that either. He's at penalties. Didn't build up his troops. I had been building up Dearborn's troops. I'm down to just a handful of cards. Maybe try to rally some troops. I've got these Oneida Indians I can build up for Harrison. That might be a good move. Of course, I may be too late at this point because the Brits could come storming down. And in fact, this is probably where they want to move. Painful. Well, Rensselaer finally managed and built up his forces on a campaign card at the end of the turn to march into Erie and drive Brock out. Brock was able to retreat because he still got supply lines into enemy territory. He could not have done a naval retreat, though. It would have been like Fort Malden down here. So he was lucky that he had a line there. Now he's kind of at risk here in Cleveland because if Rensselaer attacks him, he could wipe out the army because there's nowhere to retreat to if there aren't ships to carry that army. Now that is a decent number of ships there still. It takes... It's going to take, you know, 4 decent-sized ships, basically, to carry it. I don't think the Brits have that. So they may have to just give up Brock, write him off. They could, of course, dispatch some ships there. They've only got 2 decent-sized ships and a couple of schooners. I don't think there's a detachment, I think. I'm not sure. It's not clear to me what is and what isn't a detachment in this. Maybe the asterisk units, but I saw bigger units with those, so I'm not sure. Nothing happening over here. I didn't want to attack with Dearborn, so I launched a naval attack with Chauncey. He went and gathered his ships, attacked Yao. He was defeated. He actually had a bonus of about +2 on there because more ships. He had a frigate. Yeo hasn't gotten his frigate into his fleet yet. But Ontario was saved for the Brits, and the Americans were thrown back. This was kind of a low-value attack. Perry attacking would have been more valuable. Perry, of course, doesn't have any frigates. He has a couple of brigs. He would have been outnumbered. It looked like an unlikely victory for him. That would have actually been very valuable if it cut Brock off from being able to withdraw, from having supply, etc., it would make it very, very difficult for Brock to be of any value. Just a single unit here would block his forces, essentially. But that's not happening either. Alright, so we'll move into summer and autumn. The Treaty of Ghent gets shuffled in, which can allow for the Battle of New Orleans, I think, extra victory point cards to be played. Treaty of Ghent's kind of interesting. I'll explain it briefly now. So this gets shuffled in, and it may or may not show up. If it shows up, from the wording, the way this is worded, it's really terrible. Ends the game, a number of VPs equal to the number of cards left in the player who played the card's hands must be subtracted from the total. Well, what total? I'm assuming that player's total. Basically, this card allows you to sign a piece earlier, and then however many cards you have are subtracted from your victory point total. So you give more away to get a quicker piece. So if the tide is turning against you, you might be able to take an advantage on that. But for the most part, you're probably paying too high a cost, and you want to hold it till the end of the game. That's my view of it. Whether or not it even comes up, I just wanted to discuss that because that's a little lanky. You know, some of it may be a lack of an apostrophe on... in the player who played the card's hand. So where should the possessive apostrophe be? I don't know, but it was kind of difficult to read. I think it does make sense, though. It's not explained in the rules anywhere. It's not clarified there. It's just from the card. Most of the cards are that way. There's no, in fact, all of them, I think. There's no detailed description of most of these cards, or any of them. Things like campaigns are kind of discussed. Anyway, let's move on. I think I can do this all in one. Well, no, let's load this one. Alright.